She didn't offer it. When she left, she thanked us. Not for forgiveness. Not for patience. Just for listening. And that, strangely, felt like the final chapter closing. Not with drama. Not with fireworks. But with something gentler and far more human. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood bloomed. Literally. Flower pots returned in every shade of rebellion, wind chimes sang from half the porches, and laughter carried farther than Karen's old drone ever had. The wall held, the community held, and slowly, so did something else. Peace. Not the kind that comes from silence or submission, but the kind that comes from people choosing to be neighbors instead of adversaries. And in the middle of it all, my wife remained steady as a stone. Not the sheriff of the HOA, not the enforcer of rules. Just the one who had dared to say enough and help build something better in the aftermath. We never did throw away the red blazer. It stayed tucked away in the back of the storage shed, resting atop a box of old documents and rogue HOA newsletters. My wife said she kept it to remember what happens when power goes unchecked. I think she kept it because some symbols deserve to be disarmed, not destroyed. And maybe, someday, someone will find it and ask what it meant. Not what it was used for, but what it came to stand for once it had been folded up and set aside. A warning, maybe? But also a lesson. That fear in a fancy jacket is still just fear. And no matter how loud it shouts, it can't outlast the quiet strength of someone who knows how to stand, not above people, but beside them. By the time spring rolled in fully, the cabin felt more like home than it ever had before. The wind carried warmth instead of warnings, the lake shimmered like it was holding secrets too beautiful to speak aloud, and the community around us had started behaving less like a neighborhood under surveillance, and more like a place where people could finally breathe. The HOA board meetings became casual affairs, with folding chairs arranged in a half-circle instead of lined up like a court hearing, and coffee brewed in the corner by volunteers who used to avoid gatherings entirely. My wife rarely spoke unless prompted, but when she did, people listened, not because of fear or obligation but because she had become the kind of leader no one had voted for and everyone trusted. It wasn't authority she held, it was steadiness, earned one absurd battle at a time. Karen hadn't returned to any meetings, not even once, but word spread that she was still living nearby in a smaller house on the edge of the community limits, just past the tree line where the lake road dips down. Occasionally, people mentioned seeing her walking alone near the edge of the woods with a notebook in her hand, always writing but never stopping long enough to talk. No one pressed. It was like everyone agreed, without saying a word, that letting her be was part of the healing. But peace doesn't always mean stillness. Sometimes it means the dust has settled just enough for the real work to begin. And for us, that meant the new vote. One afternoon, we received a formal envelope delivered by hand from the new acting board secretary, a sweet retired teacher named Judy who had once been fined for planting roses instead of state-approved boxwoods. She smiled shyly and said, "We're hoping you'll accept the nomination." Inside the envelope was an official ballot for the upcoming HOA board elections, and my wife's name was listed under the position of community liaison, a role that hadn't existed 6 months ago, but had been written into the bylaws unanimously after the tribunal fallout. It wasn't a power seat. It was a trust seat. Someone who didn't enforce rules but helped shape how they were applied. Someone who people could come to with concerns before things exploded into citations and drone flyovers. I watched my wife read it quietly, then place it on the table without expression. "You going to run?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Do I have to campaign?" "I think you've already done that," I said, and we both laughed. But that night, something else arrived. Taped to our door in a plain envelope was another note, written in the same careful, upright script we now recognized instantly. Karen. The letter wasn't long, but it hit harder than any tribunal, any fence, any drone or shouted demand for identification ever had. She wrote that she had voted for my wife. That she believed the community would be better in her hands than it ever had been in hers. That no amount of power had ever made her feel as safe as knowing someone else was watching the gate with clarity, not control. There was no apology, not this time, and somehow that made it even more honest. Just an admission of truth. And at the bottom, a line that read, "I know what the blazer meant. But it's better off with you." My wife didn't speak for a while after reading it. She folded it carefully, slid it into the envelope, and walked out to the shed alone. I watched from the window as she pulled out the box, opened the lid, and for the first time since we'd received it, took out the red blazer. She held it for a long while in both hands, then walked to the back of the property where the first wildflowers were beginning to bloom and quietly draped it over the bench beneath the oak tree. She didn't bury it. Didn't burn it. Just left it where someone might sit, maybe reflect, maybe just enjoy the view without needing to own it. The next morning, someone else had taken it. We never saw who. It was just gone, like it had been claimed by the woods or carried off by wind. Neither of us ever mentioned it again. When the election day arrived, the town hall was more crowded than we'd ever seen it. People came with dogs, with kids, with casseroles and coffee cakes. The ballots were cast on paper, old school and slow, counted in full view of everyone by a group of residents sitting at a folding table with Sharpies and magnifying glasses. My wife didn't campaign, didn't speak, didn't do anything except show up and vote for someone else. And when the results were read aloud, unanimous, no abstentions, she simply nodded once and accepted the post with a short, quiet thank you. No one cheered. It wasn't that kind of win. But people smiled, and some nodded, and a few clapped gently like something sacred had just been restored. After the meeting, a few of the new board members lingered, asking questions, seeking advice, even telling small stories about times they'd clashed with Karen in the past and never knew how to push back. My wife listened to all of them, offering suggestions only when needed, never assuming, never demanding. She left the building last that night, holding the community's trust in one hand and her keys in the other, a symbol of what leadership could look like when stripped of ego and fear. As the weeks passed, the HOA became something different. Not perfect, nothing ever is, but flexible, human. People started hosting their own meetings. Rules were rewritten to account for things like joy, creativity, and yes, even wind chimes. One resident opened up a free library box in front of their property, stocked weekly with mystery novels and kids' books. Someone else installed a bench near the lake that faced the sunrise, painted in bold colors that would have once triggered a fine. No one complained. And every now and then new families arrived, people who had heard the old stories, maybe, but saw the new ones being written in real time. They moved in, planted things, painted things, sang at fire pits, and built their lives in the cracks where fear had once tried to take root. And at the center of it, my wife simply lived. She didn't rule. She didn't enforce. She just showed up, again and again, with open hands, a patient voice, and the quiet understanding that real authority comes not from having the power to silence but from having the strength to listen. And somewhere, not far from all of it, a woman once known as Karen, now just a neighbor without a title, walked the tree line with a notebook, writing not fines or warnings, but maybe something new entirely. Maybe a different story. One that had taken longer to learn. One that began not with control but with surrender. And in the end, perhaps that was the most unexpected twist of all. Not that we won, but that everyone grew. Even the one who tried the hardest not to.